Okay, so we're about to add the timers into our game now. And to configure our game properly, we probably want to add the callbacks, the timer event functions that we'll get, that we're going to need to reset the game, flash the lights, turn the lights off, those event handler functions. We're going to want to create those first so then we can go back and create our timers. And when we create our timers, we'll say, hey, when you tick, you call this function. So let's make the functions first, and then we'll make the timers that actually call that function. So one of the functions here, let's see, like the easiest one is going to be the light off function. And what this is going to do, it takes the control that triggered the notification and then an event arg structure about the event. Okay, so what does this do? All this does is set the light. It turns off the light any light that was currently on. So what this thing is going to have to do is, we're going to have to turn off the timer that ticked, and then we're going to have to put the the no lights on image in the box in the image control. All right, so we'll go do this later. What we do is just we want to make this thing just so we have it as a stub, and then we'll actually implement it later. And then let's make a reset function here that has exactly the same signature. And we'll actually go implement it all later. Reset the game. And then let's make another function called flashlight that's going to also be an event handler. And let me clean that up. All right, so what do I do when my curly braces get out of whack? Edit, advanced, format document. Edit advanced format document. Boom. Okay. So now that I have these functions, and we can go make timers that actually call them. So we can go create our main timer, our reset timer, and our off timer. So let's make our main timer here. And we already created the object. We already initialized it up here. We made allocated it a new dispatch timer object. Now we can just configure it. So the interval for the main timer, did we make one called slow? I think we did. Yay, cool. And then let's tell it when it ticks. What function does this thing call? This is going to call our flash light function. And that's going to flash through, so it's going to cycle through the sequence of lights that the computer has generated, and we need plus equals there. All right, and then let's go configure our off timer. And let's make a new time span for this guy. And we don't want the lights to stay on very long, so maybe just like a quarter of a second. So let's make something like 250 milliseconds. And when this timer ticks, it's going to call the light off function? Oh gosh, I forgot. What did I just add? Light off. There we go. So it'll call the light off function. And then we have a reset timer. And its interval property is going to be, let's say like maybe we want 2 seconds before the before the game restarts. So let's go create like a 2-second timer there. So it's like, what is it? Days, hours, minutes, seconds. Yeah. All right, and then, well, what function does the reset timer call when it ticks? It's going to call our reset function. There you go. Okay, so now we have our timers configured. So let's start adding the functions that we're going to need here. We've got we're going to have we're going to start by like putting lights into the sequence, and then we'll have the computer play the sequence. So we're going to need a function called add light, and it does not take any parameters. And what it's going to do is generate a random color code, put it in the list, and then set the index back to 0. Because anytime you're adding a new light, there's an assumption, okay, the player must have reached the end of the list, and now you have to add a new light to make the game more difficult. So how do we make a color code? Well, let's look at our color codes here. We named them consecutively, or numbered them starting at 0. So we'll just use a number less than 4, and we'll be safe. So let's make a new number less than 4, and I'll call it, int c equals ram.next 4. And I could do this all in one line. And now that we've got this color code, let's put it in our sequence. And to add something to a list, we just use the add function. And then let's set our index back to 0, because we want to start over at the beginning. All right, so there's the add light function. The light off function is very, very easy too. So the only thing we have to be aware of is when we get the timer event to turn a light off, we need to shut off the timer because we don't want to keep turning lights off. Like it's like it fires once and it's done. So this thing that generated the event here, that's the sender, but we also know that it is the off timer. We can just stop it. Don't keep ticking. And then let's put the image of all the lights off in our image box. So that image, that control that we added to our form, like what is it called? I think it's just called image. Yes, it's called image. I mean, we could go look in our XAML file and you can see there it is. It's right there. There's the name of that control. When we dragged it onto our form, the editor, the builder thing gave it the name image. All right, so let's go set we'll go put the image in there. Now, what property do we manipulate for that? That's the source property, which is right there. That's our source property. If we were doing this in Windows Forms, then it would be the image property. In WPF, it's the source property. And then what do we set it to? Well, we need to look up the image for that, right? Well, what color code is that? That's none, right? That's actually going to be images sub none. Go into the lookup table and get me the image that corresponds to no lights being on. And I think that's it. That's all we have to do in that function. That's an easy one. All right, and then let's see what what else do we need? Okay, so there's our add light function, and then one of the big ones here is flashlight, used by the game. Cycle through the lights. So what this is going to do is it's going to turn on a light, wind up the timer to turn it off, add one to the index, and if we hit the end of the list, then we're going to shut off the timer. And remember, we had this interval thing that we made at the beginning. So we want to delay before we start flashing the lights, but once we're ready to go, then we want the lights to kind of flash like, every half a second or something speedy like that. So let's set the main timer's interval to be fast. So now it'll kind of speed up. And now we can turn on the light that corresponds to the index. Right? Every time this timer goes off, we're going to add one to the index. So if it starts at 0, turn on light 0, add one to the index, turn on light 1, turn on light 2, turn on light 3, until we hit the end. How do we turn on the light for the current index? Well, I can see that I've kind of gone out of order here. So before I can work on this, I need to make the turn on light function. And what light does it turn on? Well, we're going to give it a color code. It's going to turn on a color code that we give it. And what does this thing do? Well, we're going to put the correct color in the box, play the sound, and then turn on the timer to turn this light off. So how do we turn this light on? Well, we've got the answer right here. Go look up the image that corresponds to the color and put it in the box, in the picture box. So do a lookup. Oh, you gave me red. Go get me the image for red. You gave me blue. Go get the image for blue. You gave me color I. Go look up the image for color I. Put it in the box. And how do we play the sound effect for color I? Well, we've got our sounds dictionary, right? We'll just say sounds. We'll just look up that sound effect using the color code and then tell it to play. And then we need to tell the light to turn off, right? And we have a timer just for doing that. So let's start the timer that does that. And so this is going to put the right image in the box, play the sound that goes with that light, and then wind up the timer to shut that light off in 250 milliseconds or something like that. Okay, so now that we've got this turn on function, we can come down here and actually use it. So so to turn on the light, how do we do that? Well, let's look at our turn on light function, and you can see that it takes a color code. Well, what color code do we give it? Well, the one for the light that we're supposed to turn on. Well, what's the light that we're supposed to turn on? That's the index, the one at the index. So let's go into the sequence and get the indexed light. So when index is 0, we'll turn on light 1, or 0. When index is 0, we'll turn on the first light. When index is 1, we'll turn on the second light. And then what we need to do is add 1 to the index. So the next time the timer fires or goes off, then we'll play the next light. But we've got to be careful because the index could go past the end of the list. So let's check for that case. So how do we check to see if we've gone past the end of the list? Well, that's where we use the list's count property. So we could say if the index is equal to the number of things in the sequence. And how do we check the number of things in the sequence? That's the count property. Well, then now we're done. So let's shut off the main timer. We're done. And then let's set our index back to 0, because now that we've played the sequence, the player's going to start pushing buttons, and we need them to start at the beginning. So we'll set our index to 0. And now that we've got the this function to flash the lights for us, and I'll put in here, go to next light. Then now, well, we've got everything we need to test, right? So now we can put stuff into the list and then start the main timer, and we should see it actually start cycling lights for us. I mean, hopefully it'll work. So let's do that here just for testing. I'm going to call add light a bunch of times. And then let's, just for testing, this is just for testing, and then let's call play. Let's start our main timer. So that should work for us here. All right, hey, it actually worked. Pretty cool. Let's run it again. All right, so it works. Now, I think what we need is we need one more function that's actually going to start the sequence off for us here. And this is just a very simple two-line function here. So let's go all the way down. Let's go down to the bottom. We just need a function that starts the main timer. And then we'll just call this play sequence. And what this is going to do is let's set the main timer's interval to slow. So there's a delay before it starts playing the first light. And then let's set the index back to 0 just to make sure, just to be safe. And then we'll start the main timer dot start. All right, so I think we're good there. Okay, so instead of starting the timer directly, what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to test. You know, this should have the same effect. Okay, so that's good. And you notice how there's a delay before the first light plays. And then it kind of speeds up and plays. They all play kind of in quick sequence after that. So that's what that whole interval for is. The fast and slow is for. It's like when we want a long delay before the timer goes off the first time, but every time after that we want it to kind of to go off quickly. And then like while we're in here, let's work on our reset function. So what does the reset function have to do? Well, the reset function has a you know, it's being driven by a timer, the reset timer, and when that goes off, we want to stop that timer, right? Because like we want that thing to fire once and then we're done. So we have now shut off the timer. We don't want to keep resetting. We don't want that to keep going off. And then what we also want to do is now, like whatever sequence that the player messed up on and has caused the game to reset needs to get cleared. So how do we get everything out of a list? We can just call its clear function. And now it's empty. Nothing in there anymore. And then, but that's the problem because we want to have at least one light in the list. So put another light in the list. And then what we can do is call play sequence. Right, and that'll start the game playing again. So now actually we can, instead of using play sequence to start our game, we could also just get rid of all this here. And now we can just say reset. Now there's a problem here that reset takes 2 parameters. So I could just pass in null for both of them because I know that that's a little lazy. I could also make these default parameters down here. I could say, okay, well, if the user doesn't supply any values, just default them to null. That would work as well. And then I can call this thing without any arguments, and it should work. There we go. See, it's not complaining. It says if you don't supply the parameters, set them to null. And it should just flash once there. Okay. So now we kind of built this thing backwards, but it's working now. All right. So I'm gonna stop the recording here, and then now that we've got the thing kind of playing through its lights, then what we really need to do is just add user input and just check to see, okay, like what color did the player click on, and then does that color code correspond to the light that the player is actually trying to match? And if they guess wrong, we sound the buzzer and reset the game. If they do match correctly, now we've got something else. We have to check, okay, did they hit the end of the list? And if they hit the end of the list, then we need to add a new light to the list and then play the sequence again. And that's actually all we have to do. It's not, we're almost done. There's not much more. So there you go. Now we have our game cycling through the lights. And so in the next video, we'll actually add the user input.